Leo Spinelli, and this is our second program this fall. And tonight, Gloria Pritts, who was our president and now is historical for the village of Mamaroneck, is going to get to talk and talk all about Harbor Island, how it started and all that. I'm going to leave it up to her to give you a terrific presentation tonight.
Thank you. We all know our Harbor Island Park and our harbor with the two basins on either side and the entrance to the harbor. We all know that. We're all familiar with these gorgeous pictures that Don Heighthouse has taken, even though those pictures are ones that I took. But nevertheless, we all know Harbor Island as the beautiful place for all this happy things that go on down there. But was it always this way? Was it always this beautiful harbor? Of course it wasn't. What it was just mud flats. We had only a small channel coming in from Long Island Sound. This particular survey was done by the Corps of Army Engineers in 1909 when the Orienta Yacht Club traveled to Washington, D.C. to apply for some kind of dredging to make the harbor a commercial harbor. And with that, the Corps of Engineers sent people up to survey the harbor. And what I have done, this is just a copy of it that I made, and they had high tide heights of the water, low tide heights of the water, but that was very confusing for the little layman that I am. So what I did was work with it and color code it to see what it is. The island, the original island, Hog Island, was just this little piece of green land. The road coming down from the mainland, this is the Boston Post Road. The road coming down from the mainland, which of course was made, and it was made about 1837, 1840 by a wealthy man from Orienta who wanted to do some kind of commercial venture in the harbor, and he decided we needed a road. We had very many farmers that were growing things, and they needed to sell them down into the city, but to get them there they had to transport them by boat. And so he proceeded to make a road from the mainland to Hog Island. And of course, to do that, what he did was get great big huge boulders and drop them over the side of a boat, and sure enough they went down into the water, disappeared in the muck. And so sure enough then what he did was get more rocks, big huge boulders. We had tons of big boulders to throw down to build, and he finally built a base for the road, and that is the road that leads down into the island, that same road that we have today. And of course then this dark shaded area is all mud flats. At low tide, all you did was see mud and spartina grass and the sedges. One of the things, one of the very earliest rules made by the town of Mamaroneck annual meeting was that the sedges, which would grow sometimes over 6 feet or higher, and of course that was the spartina grass, the seagrass, that was not to be cut by anyone until September 10th of any year. And anyone stealing it that was not living in the community, because it was open to anyone living in the community, but anyone from outside of the community was arrested and fined. That big, huge, tall sedges was very valuable for bedding for the cattle in their barns, so it was very important to control it. But after what I'm going to show you is what Harbor Island is today, so you get a decent perspective. Harbor Island today is that green land. And you could see with the county pier on one side and the little fishing pier on the other, that's what it is today. But this is what it was in 1909 and earlier. Here in the eastern tip of Hog Island, there was also a rock that went across 2 shore acres. It was called Bush Rock, because what they did, what the fishermen did, the boatmen, was tie trees on top of it, so that at high tide you would be able to see the rock and not go into the rock because it's under the water. But of course, low tide you saw it. But once the village of Mamaroneck came into being and they applied again to the government for dredging, they took out that rock so that a channel from the outer harbor could come into the harbor itself, into the East Basin. The West Basin remained mud flats until 1938-39, when a huge dredging job was done, and I remember that. I remember seeing the dredging in the harbor with all of the silt, the gook, coming from these mud flats and put over into the dump, because the village of Mamaroneck was very progressive. Little by little, this little 4-acre Hog Island was enlarged with construction debris that was just dumped around, with digging the subways in New York City. Barges would come in and just dump things around. They also then started a dump, someplace to incinerate garbage, and that was here in this West Basin side. And when West Basin was dredged, they just put all the silt over that old dump. The dump was really fire burning there all the time. I mean, I lived in Orienta, so I would pass there just about every day, and there were just thousands of seagulls and terns screaming all over. It was, it was pretty. I liked it. But of course, once the West Basin was dredged and the silt just sat there, and you would see, like maybe after about 4 or 5 years, it dried up and cracked. It was just clay, and then before you knew it, little puffs of grass would start to grow. And then of course the village improved it, and we now have the wonderful soccer field over there behind the 1816 schoolhouse. Okay?
Not only were there seagulls there, but there were rats. They were just as big as a bulldog. About that long and about that fat.
Leo was telling us.
Came into that, we used to go in there and look for things, and when you see that, you went the other way.
Leo was telling us that in the dump, the old village dump, that in addition to the seagulls screeching and everything else, there were huge rats that were there all the time. But of course, that's where the garbage was placed. your scraps from your food, and so, I mean, the rats had a field day. That was their supermarket.
Also, the cops used to have practice
and the police used to practice shooting there, killing the rats, which was a good thing. But let us talk about what the harbor was before all of this came into being. We know that there were very many eels in the harbor, in the mud. Of course, that would go to the Sargasso Sea to mate, and of course they died there, and the many horseshoe crabs. I remember there was always a horseshoe crab on the beach when we went. Well, they used to feed the horseshoe crabs to the hogs. And lobsters were so abundant that they would sell for 3 cents a pound. And if you're digging for clams, in one tide you could get 2 full bushels of clams. During Depression time, I remember Steve Johnson talking about during Depression time, very many things, what they did was go down to the island and pick the clams, dig for the clams and the mussels, and that was their supper. And it was a good supper. At one time, a shark, also a 6-foot shark, was found just off Hog Island. So, we did have very many different things. Yes?
What we did when I was a youngster was go down to Harbor Island, and I got my first bicycle out of Harbor Island.
How did you get your Gil Allen just said he just got his first bicycle down Harbor Island. How did you get that?
Piece by piece.
Piece by piece. So you went to the dump and picked up different pieces of bicycles and made your own.
And put it together. And that's where we got wagons and wheels and things.
Wagon wheels you also were able to get. Also, those were your toys, and you built them yourself. You had to know how to do it.
Absolutely.
And perhaps you made a mistake, but then you did it over and over again until it worked and you got it the way you wanted. That's wonderful. So, the dump had its good things, even though now with our environmental concerns, we're so concerned with anything burning, but there was always the garbage burning down there at the village dump. At 3 different times, we know that the Long Island Sound froze over. The first one that we have recorded was 1855, and then it was 1867 and 1875. That the sound from here to Long Island, 7 miles away, froze over, that if it wasn't so cold, you could walk across. We're told that some people skated across. We also have a story about a boat with a passenger vessel that got stuck in the ice, and the passengers walked off the boat on the ice to Mamaroneck Harbor and then went down to the railroad depot and took the train to New York. I mean, that sounds incredible, just incredible. But as a young person, I recall the West Basin freezing over, because of course the West Basin did not have the Mamaroneck River flowing into it as the East Basin did. So the West Basin would freeze over, and you would see men go down and dig a hole and poke down to get the eels. I know my father loved eels and would go eeling quite a bit. Perhaps he got them when he was fishing and picked up the eels along with it, but we had very many.
On that freeze.
Yes, Gil.
We had it in the 20s also.
You had what in the 20s?
A complete freeze of the harbor of the Sound.
Yes, that's right. Gil said in the 1920s that the The harbor froze over. I don't think that it froze completely to Long Island, but there was a deep freeze because we have heard the story of some young men who had a car, you know, one of those old cars that don't weigh what they weigh today, but they decided to drive out to Hen Island, and the men on the shore said, oh well, goodbye to them, we won't see them anymore. But of course they drove to Hen Island and they drove on back. So it was
Also, salt water freezes at 26 degrees.
I'm sorry, Leo, I didn't hear you.
What could freeze?
Salt water.
Salt water freezes before fresh water.
In them days, it was always below zero around here.
Yes, it was below, yes, temperature would get below zero.
The ice breakers come in there and broke it up, 1 foot thick. I've seen it myself.
Yes, so the ice you saw was a foot thick.
1 foot.
1 foot thick.
And it did go all the way across.
And what?
Went all the way across.
They did?
Yes.
So it did freeze all the way across.
Late 20s.
Yes. Well, we don't have it nowadays. But in 1870, to get back to our historic harbor, a gentleman named Huntley built a hotel on the island. This particular picture, here's the road leading down into the island, and there's the hotel on the island. Remember, 1870, the island was very small. And sure enough, Mr. Huntley was in the theatrical business, and we're told that a number of actors would come here for the summer and would stay at the hotel. But we also hear the story that where the hotel was located on the island, there was a shack, a shed. And sure enough, in building the hotel, they built it over the shed, so that the roof of the shed became the second floor, the floor of the second story. And it seemed to be that it was kind of tippy and everything else, but nevertheless, who cared at that point, right? And sure enough, it did have public rooms on the ground floor with a bar and a pool room, of course, and a dining room and an office. But it was around about 1900, you know, the hotel was only made out of wood, not anything substantial, and it caught fire and it burned. But one of the things they did have at the hotel always was that there was a small boat hung outside on divots in case the tide came up onto the island, so that the people had some kind of transportation to get to the mainland. So it was really quite interesting. Other things we had here in Mamaroneck, we started out with being a commercial harbor. That we did have a sand and stone business on the East Basin, about where the ramp is today that you can just put your boat in. This particular picture shows only one hopper, where the barge would come in and the crane would load the hopper. But I remember 2 or 3 hoppers being there, that they did have very much of a big business. But this is a barge coming in with the gravel and everything. Here in this picture, this is the island, okay? And you see there's water all around. This is water with the grass in it. There was, round about here, there was a bridge where the tide could come in and go into that particular place. Another business venture that was there was Mitchell Oil Company had very many huge old oil tanks right at the entrance to Mamaroneck River in the East Basin. No, I don't have them. I don't have a picture.
Now, that was his office. Gas station.
On Post Road.
On Post Road, next to Brooks. That was Mitchell's gas station.
Oh, Mitchell, yeah,
That's where the oil tank. That's where their office was.
the stone building next to the brewer's boatyard was the office for Mitchell Oil. It was huge tanks, 5 or 6 of them, that stood there, and I'm sure it was heating oil that was stored in those tanks. But round about 1960, one of the tanks sprung a leak, and that was the end of the tanks. We're very fortunate. The tanks disappeared.
Gloria, about that hotel, who besides actresses
Huntley, actors used it? I don't know.
besides actors?
I don't know.
Because it's
I have not found any other reference to it other than it was the actors. Well, he was in the theatrical business, so he would be able to, get the stage people to come and spend some time. Yes. Yes.
What's Mr. Huntley's first name?
I beg your pardon?
What's Mr. Huntley's first name?
I don't hear
Just
you.
Huntley's first name.
John.
And so the hotel's there from the 1870s to 1990s?
I think it was John T. Huntley. He then sold the hotel to 2 other people. I don't remember one name, but the other one was Thompson. Okay, but then it burned.
Okay.
Burned. It disappeared. And the firemen, of course, we had volunteer firemen by the time 1900 came, and we did have the road, so firemen went down to see what they could do with the fire, and there was plenty of water all around them, but they did not have the equipment to get the water into their hoses to fight the fire, and so the hotel just burned to the ground. It had a barn. I remember that it had a barn. That was something that was used with as a stage, with the barn as a backdrop, and we would have very many Council of the Arts affairs there on a Sunday night in summer, but then some young man a troubled young man, burned the barn, and that was the end of that. Yeah, remember? Yeah. Here we have a picture of the island in 1934. And it's in January 1934. So here's the road coming up onto the island. This is the old green dock. This is the bridge in the road where the tide water would come into behind the island, and you could see that this is part of the fill that has already started to fill in that area. The tennis courts were placed here. The old barn I was speaking to you about that had been part of the hotel. This was the old barn. That there was then a platform, I think it was an old trailer truck, that was put in front of it as a stage, and we saw some beautiful Council of the Art programs there, similar to what we have now. We're so fortunate. But you could see just here the WPA men are starting to work on the pavilion. January 1934, and we of course have the county dock, county pier, bulkhead they called it. That was not there to start with, of course. When the county put in the sewage plant here in Mamaroneck on the Post Road, they needed a pipeline to go from the plant with the treated sewage out onto buoy 42, way out into the Sound. And so the trunk line went through here, and they made a protection around it, but then they needed to fill in that bulkhead. And what they did was dredge here in front of what is now the beach to fill in the bulkhead. So what that really did was create a beach for us to really swim at. The WPA that came in the 34 and built the seawalls and the pavilion, they constructed the beach to be two layers, to be an upper beach and a lower beach, with the wall in between. The wall was where you have the sidewalk nowadays at the beach. So it looks so different. This was the parking area, as you can see. The playground. The village created the playground in 1919, and they hired a woman to be there at the playground with the children, and the attendance was something like an average of 83 every day during the summer months when school was not in session. So it was truly wonderful. But before we had all of that, let's just, yes.
I had a point to the year 34.
Oh, sure.
In 1934, by that time, sports were taking over. And we had one of the best ball fields and football fields right there. The Montreal All-Stars and Dodgers.
Now, Gil Allen is talking about I think it was the late 20s and early 30s,
yes,
when the Mamaroneck sports team took over and was created, and it was a semi-pro team, wasn't it, Mr. Allen? Yes.
There was no pro baseball in those days.
But it was football.
Football
and baseball, okay? And they played here in Lanza Field. Was the baseball.
The baseball field is the same as it is.
But the football field was here.
The first was over on that side.
On the other side?
Where the road goes from now.
Where what?
Where the road goes down to the harbor.
Where the road goes down to the harbor, where on the East Basin.
Behind the recreation office.
Yes. This is where the football field was.
And they put it over this side later.
Yes. Oh, they did. I'm told that those sportsmen did an excellent job. They were all Mamaroneck men that played very well. They were very proud.
We had a connection with the engineers, the Local 57.
We had connection with the engineers, Local 57.
They came in and did it all at no expense.
At no expense. Oh, wonderful. I'm also told that we had very many people go to see the games and enjoy the games. They were, of course, during the day because we didn't have lights, correct?
Right.
Maybe a Saturday, a Sunday?
And by the late 30s, we had temporary on the softball field.
By the late 1930s, there were temporary lights at the softball field. Wonderful.
By the tennis court.
Here's, yes.
Side where they played. There was also the yacht club.
A what?
A yacht club.
Yeah.
A yacht club.
Right in the water.
You're talking about the Sheldrake
Right.
Yacht Club. Well, the Sheldrake
It's
Yacht
located
Club.
right there. Some of the posts are still in the water. Some of the posts are still in the water.
Yeah.
You could see them.
Sheldrake Yacht Club, which started in 1905, was squatters here on the island. And they were...
They had two rentals there. Homer's, that was where you mentioned before, where the gravel came in. Right
Yes.
next to that. And on this side, where it was where it was a low tide, you couldn't use it. On this side, no, on this side.
Yes, because they're
On this side of the boat. On the east, west basin there.
the west
No,
basin.
right over, right by the bridge. Right by
Yeah.
the bridge. If you
Yeah.
came underneath the bridge, it was on this side. On this side, right there. But it was only good on high tide. The boats
Oh,
stayed
yes.
on mud.
Yes, oh,
You
yes.
only take the boats out on high tide,
Well-
because it had to go underneath the bridge.
That's right. I mean, as you can see, the whole thing was just mud
There
flat.
were two
Yes. Yes, at low tide.
rental boats.
Just a picture of a beach scene in Sunday in July 1938. And you could see this was the lower beach that I spoke about, and this is the upper beach. But you see that there's just hundreds of people enjoying themselves. We also the beach just was a place that everyone in town would go and enjoy themselves. I'm going to get back to boating here in Mamaroneck Harbor. Of course, the boating started with the Indians who built their canoes out of huge logs. They would burn them and then dig them out to make a canoe. And of course they used the sound, they used the harbor in order to get their seafood. It was a supermarket for them that was just so convenient, so full of just so many seafood, clams, lobsters, fish, sturgeon. It just was just wonderful. We do know that the fastest way in the 1700s to get to New York City was by boat. The only way, the roads were not passable. I mean, they were just dirt roads, and of course they were dirt roads up through the 1800s. So traveling was just so bad, but taking a vessel down to New York City, you were down there in a half hour in no time. And we're told that Caleb Heathcote, who had the manor of Scarsdale here on Heathcote Hill, he went down into the city because that was his business. He even turned out that he was mayor of New York City for a short time. He traveled by boat from Mamaroneck Harbor down into the city. We're told that the slaves rowed him, but I don't know, whatever. But round about the 1800s, the middle 1800s, we have men starting to build boats here in Mamaroneck. And one of them was Joseph Haynes Gedney. Joseph Haynes Gedney, from the Gedney family that came to Mamaroneck in 1697 from Salem, Massachusetts. They had many children, and Joseph Haynes Gedney was one of them. And he started his boat building business. And one of the things that he did do was build the Mary E. Gordon. He built that, and he named it after his wife, whose name was Mary, and her mother's family name was Gordon. So the boat was named after her. And of course, Joseph had 8 sons and 1 daughter. And we know that one of the sons, William Gedney, continued with the shipbuilding business. But Joseph was known that he he built Mamaroneck sloops. His own models, his own creations, built them here in Mamaroneck, quite a number of them. And they were known to be very reliable, very dependable, very looked for sloops for Long Island Sound. One of them, the John Perry, had such a huge sail that as it would be coming down past Orienta, the people here on the land could see it coming because the sail was way up above the trees. So it was really wonderful. But his Mary E. Gordon started regular service to New York City from Mamaroneck, that people could count on it. But then once he passed away, the ship was purchased by the Charles E. Davis Company, steamship company, and they ran the Mary E. Gordon out of Mamaroneck until 1923. William Gedney, his son, also built a number of ships, number of vessels, and he had his boatyard where the Post Road boatyard is today, right next to Brewers, where the Brewers Post Road boatyard is. That's where the Gedney boatyard was. And I do have a negative of that, and one of these days I'd love to have it developed, to look at it. It's quite interesting. Back to the harbor. The harbor became, after World War I, the American Legion built a memorial down at Harbor Island in the circle. You know how you come down the road towards the beach and there's then a circle, and now we have a cannon in it in the center of that island of the circle? Well, that originally was the memorial for the 16 local men who died in World War I. And the Legion, post-90, they planted 16 trees, and on each one of the trees there was a bronze plaque for naming one of the men who died. And here we have every Memorial Day there were services down there, and here's just a couple of pictures from 1925 of the services that were held down there at the Memorial Grove. And I remember very many speeches, and also guns would be shot off and pigeons would be flying all over, around and around. It was really a wonderful Memorial Day service. But that memorial is gone. The trees, for one thing, some of them died. Some of the plaques were missing one way or another. There is still a stone plaque there that says it is the Memorial Grove. By the way, at the same time for World War I, the VFW had a memorial grove in Tompkins Park. I just don't want to slight them, but it was the VFW that had the Tompkins Park Memorial, which is a lovely, beautiful memorial there, right on the corner of Tompkins Avenue and East Boston Post Road. And the Legion had the memorial at Harbor Island. When we look at the harbor nowadays, in the summertime, so full of boats, I'm told, the figure I was given in 2002, there were 770 boats in our harbor. That, of course, includes the little dinghies to get to the big boats, but the boats are large, so much larger than they were. This is a 1943 map of the harbor. And you can see that, again, we have the mud flats still in the East Basin, but we can have the boat moorings are so indicated here, and you could see how few they were and how tiny they were. Okay, so it's quite a bit of difference to what we have nowadays. We are no longer a commercial harbor. We are a non-commercial harbor strictly for pleasure boating. Do I have any questions? No? Yes.
When did it stop being?
It stopped being a commercial harbor when the Sand and Gravel Company left, which was, I believe, in the early 60s. And then when the Mitchell Oil Company tanks left, that was, I believe, in the late 60s. So it strictly became pleasure boating. Of course, nowadays we do have a number of marinas that have existed for quite a while, at least since 1900. And we also have Director's Yacht Yard that is still the only shipbuilding organization we have in the community. But anything to do with boats and boating is the largest commercial venture in the village of Mamaroneck today. So it's something that we enjoy, just going down to the harbor and watching the boats coming and going on a Sunday night at 5 o'clock when all of the boats are returning. It's like the thruway, you know, it's just seeing one beautiful one right after another. Yes?
I remember as a child that there were many activities down at the island, including carnivals and boxing. I remember one time they set up a boxing ring.
You remember a boxing ring
Yes.
set up?
Prize
You were
fighting.
a child.
Yes.
So where was it set up?
That was on the west, side, the original side. Is that the west basin?
No, it would
The
be
west
the
side?
East Basin. You're talking about on this side?
Yes.
Where the Fireman's Carnival?
Exactly.
Oh, boxing ring. Were there any local boxers?
Well, there was a local prize fighter.
Pete.
Pete.
Pete DeRusa.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Each time I come home, because I was out too late. And they sold the tickets right on the bridge. Nobody went around it, but when we came there, they'd make out they didn't see us and let us go in.
Yeah, I didn't buy any ticket. I just.
I went twice.
I think that's wonderful. Right.
There's a lot of things that happen down there besides boxing down there. The New York Athletic Club and the Knights of Columbus used to come from New York because there was a quarter-mile track around there.
A quarter-mile track, a running track.
They had track
A running track
They had track
around.
meets there.
They have track meets.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And
And you
also,
say it was the New York Athletic
that's right,
Club?
because there wasn't a place in the city in them days,
Uh-huh.
so they come down here. Not only did they do it there, but they did skating at night, but that was another place. But also they had over there, the House of David used to come. I thought it was just another Jewish team with beards, but when there was the baseball strike, they gave the history of baseball. Then I saw one night the House of David. I said, holy mackerel. They started in 1919.
The House of David.
Yes, 1919, and they used to travel all over the world. They were like the Globetrotters,
Oh,
and they used to put on a show.
they
They
saw
were
House
told,
of David
they used to
come
throw
and put on
confetti
a
at
show.
you, and then they would water it themselves, but the confetti at the people.
And that would be at Lanza Field?
Right.
Uh-huh.
No, right on the big field. On the big field.
Where the Fireman's
And
Carnival
the
is.
last time, they used to come once a year, sometimes twice. And the last time I saw them come there, they had a woman playing first base. That was unheard of.
Playing first base.
She was playing her
This
first
was the
base.
House of David.
House of David.
Was she a big woman? Was she tall? She was just a regular, a normal. Wonderful.
That was all.
And I saw one time a fellow hit a foul ball, and the car was going around the cannon, and he jumped on the running board, the guy from the House of David, and caught the ball off the roof. He says, if he didn't catch it out there, the kid was ripped, but Bobby would have went through the
There
roof.
was a foul
It was
ball.
one of those, one in a lifetime you see. And I
And
saw it.
a car was going around the circle of the memorial, and of course the cars at that time had running boards, and so the fielder ran on the car, jumped on the running board, and caught the foul ball and made an out.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
Gloria, were there any crashes or disasters in or around the Mamaroneck Harbor?
Any crashes or disasters?
Yeah, I mean, the nearby rocks or just,
I had not come across. I have not come across any reference to any crashes against rocks or shoals or anything, any disasters. I have not come across it. What I have come across is during storms, ships would be damaged quite heavily. Yes.
And also, when did Director come in?
When did the
Director Shipbuilding come in?
Directors Shipbuilding, Yacht Yard, they came in after World War II. It was probably 46, 47. Yes. And they're still here doing fabulous. And of course, directors built the Stars and Stripes ship that won the America Cup in 1987.
And one thing people don't realize that when they have these races, all those foreign ships that came here to race, all came to directors to be have repair work.
A director
And those folks that come into my shop for haircuts, those guys,
Oh, yes.
different countries coming in. And it was a commercial when the director, the sand and gravel, and once they stopped, then the government did not dredge the channel anymore. They had to keep the channel open. That's why they had to take the iceberg and cut the ice.
For the
as long as they had a business there, they had to do that.
Commercial vehicles.
Once we had no more of that business,
Yes.
whenever they dredged it, we had to pay part of it because the government
Yes.
didn't do it anymore.
Well, dredging has been done very many times. For one thing, the silt accumulates so that it has to be redredged. In fact, they're talking about doing some dredging now again. But the main dredging were, I remember 1938-39 when they did that West Basin.
And the other thing they had down there was the firemen's, they had conventions or they had racing. They used to race. America was one of the best in the volunteers in racing, and they used to be down at the harbor.
Well,
Where
in
that fire hydrant is
1925.
by the tennis courts, that's the hydrant they used to use. And it used to be down there. If it wasn't down there, it was on my street, on Elliott Avenue, and the
Where they
hydrant
would
was by the
practice,
school
yes.
that they took.
Well, 1925, the New York State Firemen's Convention was held here in Mamaroneck, and the main tent was there at Harbor Island, and I have a feeling a number of races were there at the time. Yes. Yes.
There was a lot more sports that held around than was mentioned. Tennis with Johnson
Tennis, yes.
was
Tennis was, well, ever since the tennis courts went in, which I believe were in the late 1920s, the tennis courts were put in. Before the tennis courts were put in, the only place to swim would be off the island where the tennis courts are during high tide. But then, once the beach was put at the other end, they put in the tennis courts, and that was the late 20s. that the tennis courts were first put in. Yes. I think we've about run out of time, and I thank everyone for coming, and I hope you have enjoyed it. One more thing. Yes.
At the early 20s, there was a trolley that went from White Plains to Harbor Island. They had to turn a circle there at the harbor.
The trolley to White Plains was put in the late 1890s, and it went from White Plains down to Harbor Island, and the unit to make the electricity for the trolley was in White Plains, but the coal was brought here into Mamaroneck Harbor during the night and loaded onto special trolleys and brought up to White Plains to burn for electricity for the trolley. The trolley ceased running about 1928.
Gloria, there's one other thing you didn't mention. The swimming that went down, was happening at Harbor Island, and all the kids taking lessons from Steve Johnson and the swim teams, and that was a very big thing in the summer.
Swimming at Harbor Island Beach was absolutely incredibly active. Steve Johnson, who was started in the 20s at Harbor Island as a lifeguard and continued for over 50 years, would have classes teaching all the children how to swim. He had swim teams that did very, very well, and they would practice off the what is now the fishing pier on the East Basin side. Very active in all kinds of swimming activities, very successful. It was 2 or 3 years after Steve retired in 1973 that the beach was named in his honor to honor him for over 50 years of faithful service to the community, and that's why the beach is named the Stephen E. Johnston Beach. He was fabulous. Taught us all how to swim. Took care of all of us in our swimming, in our safety. I know my parents was not concerned about any of us because they knew that Steve was such a faithful lifeguard. So, but thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thank you for a terrific program. I'm sure everybody was very happy with it.
Thank you very much.
And don't forget, our next program will be
January 21st
January 21st.
is a Wednesday.
And I think I'll be on a cruise then. I think
Wednesday,
somebody else will have to
January
take over.
21, what will the program be?
The history of LMC-TV.
History of LMC-TV, and thank you, LMC-TV.
So let's
Thank you,
give-
Sharon Mosley. for taking
Let's
up.
give Gloria another big hand. Before we finish, there's refreshments here. Why don't you just have a drink, have some refreshments, and talk about old times. Thank you.
Let's get the Daily Times.